Tēnā koutou e ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohe. E ngā mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Tēnā koutou te whānau Auckland Unitarians. Haere mai e ngā manuhiri. Haere mai koutou ki tēnei whare karakia. Neki atu i te kotahi rautau e noho tapu ana. Haere mai e ngā mema o te huitopa. Ko Rachel Mackintosh tōku ingoa, ko te kai whakahaere e nai nei. Ko Dr. Tof Eklund o tātou kai kōrero e nai nei. Ko ngā mano o te tangata te kaupapa o te rā. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kia ora. Kua nui koutou, kua nui mātou. Mā te rongo, ka mohio. Mā te mohio, ka marama. Mā te marama, ka mātou. Mā te mātou, ka ora. Greetings to the mana whenua of this place, Ngāti Whātua. To our dead, farewell, farewell, thrice farewell. Greetings to our Auckland Unitarian family. Welcome to our visitors. Welcome to those on Zoom. Welcome to this church made sacred by Auckland Unitarians for more than 124 years. For those of you in the building, please join us after the service for morning tea. It is our sacrament of hospitality. My name is Rachel Mackintosh. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the worship leader today. Our speaker today is Dr. Tof Eklund. Maria will introduce them more extensively later. Their talk today is entitled Nonbinary, Nondualist, Nonreductive. You are welcome as you are. You find us as we are. From listening comes knowledge. From knowledge comes understanding. From understanding comes wisdom. From wisdom comes well-being. Maria, would you be able to light the chalice? We light this chalice to reflect the spark of humanity in each of us. Humanity has no imperative to be binary, as fire's spark has no imperative to be confined. For fire is not gas, not liquid, not solid. Fire is non-binary, non-trinary, and fire is expansive. We light this chalice to reflect the spark of expansive humanity in all of us. For my opening words, I have a poem by non-binary poet Bex Fraser, and it is called After Raitihi. I imagine a sleeping dragon whose head lies north. My car crawls down the lumps on its neck to Raukawa Falls. The lifeblood pulsing at its through muddy, rushing and flying with spring rains. Then I wind around its back, between high scales shedding rocks to the road. The dragon trembles and we are down to one lane, asphalt crookedly torn. At Abernathy the tail begins, slower, longer, lazier curves up and over to the tip at Upokangaro. There I breathe. Phew. I am released home to my love while the dragon sleeps, this time. Please now take a moment to close your eyes and breathe. Breathe in the possibility of tomorrow. Breathe out what is done. And now I invite you, if you choose, to say with me a covenant of this congregation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other and with our God. Thank you. We will now enjoy a musical interlude of a song that our speaker Tof has chosen. The song is called Androgynous, and it is by the band The Replacements from 1984, in case you thought this was all modern and newfangled. We pause at this time to honour the very personal joys and sorrows of this gathering. I invite you to come to the front, say your name, light a candle and briefly share your joy or concern. And people on Zoom, if you wish to speak, please raise your electronic hands and I will call on you as I see you. Now I invite Maria, who will give us a reflection, and introduce Tof, who will give us our main talk.
Mōrena e te whānau, ko Maria Hayward aho. Thank you, Rachel, and welcome this morning especially to all the newcomers. Kia ora koutou katoa. I'm going to read a personal reflection, which is on flags, and related to this month's Pride theme. And then I'll introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Tof Eklund. I had intended to open Pride Month services with a brief explanation of the rainbow flags that we've been displaying, but I didn't get around to it. And then with the occasion of Tof speaking today, I wondered if there was a non-binary flag, and there is, so I'll talk about that shortly. But this gave me the opportunity to talk about rainbow flags in general. The original Pride flag was designed by a San Franciscan gay activist named Gilbert Baker, and was introduced in 1978. It's all about diversity, hope, unity, and pride within the rainbow community. The colours of the 6 horizontal stripes represent the following. Red is for life, orange, healing, yellow is sunlight, green, nature, blue, serenity and harmony, and violet is for spirit. The rainbow flag has gone through a range of iterations since 1978, and there's now a modernised version which includes the chevron that you see on the left there, with black and brown stripes, and they represent the queer and trans identities of black and brown people. The pale blue, pink and white stripes in the chevron are the colours of the transgender flag. And the flag was further revised in 2021 by the Intersex Equality Rights Group in the UK to incorporate the yellow triangle with the purple circle in the middle, which of course is for intersex people. Did you know, however, that there's also a heterosexual flag? We need one too. It's black and white stripes. I think that's cool. Black and white, no grey, no colours, clear and simple, binary, one thing or the other. Heterosexual males and females. Quite boring, really. Much more interesting to have all the colours and a few geometric shapes. And there's also the following additional flags: gender flux, grey sexual, bigender, maverick, drag feather, pansexual, bisexual, asexual, and abrosexual. We might talk about those another time. Everyone has a place, and as Keola said last week, everyone is beautiful. And because it's today, let's now look at the non-binary flag. These colours are actually in the rainbow flag, the new one, but the individual flag is the one you see on the slide. The flag represents people whose gender identity does not fit within the traditional male-female binary. Each of the colours symbolises a different subgroup of people who identify as non-binary. In summary, the yellow represents genders outside of the binary. The white represents people with many or all genders. White light, as you may remember from Keola's talk last week, includes all the colours in the invisible spectrum. Purple represents a mix or a combination of male and female genders. Black represents agender people or those with no gender. About 1 to 2% of a population might identify as non-binary. Many in this group see themselves as a mixture of both genders, and some are transgender as well. Some just don't want to be labelled as one or other gender. In this sacred place, in this whare tapu, we've heard about or been addressed by a wide range of individuals or representatives of groups. Every single person opens our eyes a little more, makes us feel a little more, broadens our spirituality, and with all of this, we are truly enriched. Our boring flag becomes so much more colourful. I want to introduce Dr. Tof Eklund, or Tof, known to me. They're our speaker for today. When Tof first joined our school at AUT, I thought they may have been Scandinavian because of the sound of their name. I'll let Tof tell you more about that if they want to. But what was interesting about Tof was that we all received a personal introductory email from them. Tof explained that they were non-binary and used the pronouns they, them. I have to confess to my own limited binary black and white thinking back then, and I wondered how I could use they, them for a singular person. But of course you can. Firstly, the grammar is actually fine. We have no problems using the pronoun you with a plural verb to refer to just one person. Are you doing anything for lunch today? Are you? Plural verb, talking to a singular person. You is both singular as well as plural, and we just work out from the context whether you're talking to one person or to more. Are you going for a coffee after this service? So either I'd make it clear that I'm talking to one of you or to all of you. Then secondly, we do actually use they with a plural verb when we either don't know the gender of the person we're talking to or about, or we don't wish to reveal the gender. For example, there's someone waiting for you in the waiting room. They had an appointment an hour ago. I now try to purposely use they as often as I can, as this normalises its use and is a much more inclusive form than the binary he, she. But back to Tof. Tof is a lecturer in English and Media Studies at AUT. But today they're going to talk about something a little more personal. I won't list Tof's academic credentials, but you're most welcome to look them up, I'm sure, if you need to. What I do know is that Tof is a very popular lecturer. So I'm really thrilled that they've agreed to speak to us today for Pride Month, and I love the title of your talk. Welcome, Tof, and thank you again.
Thank you, Maria. And actually, you've already covered a number of my talking points for me. That's great, because I always have more to say. What I've got here is a timer for myself. I do have some notes, which I might refer to, but all my students know I'm a free-range lecturer. I wander around, I stim, that's an autistic thing, and I go off on tangents. But I need to be a little bit focused today, because I've got about 15 minutes. So first, Maria gave you something of an introduction to me, but just, in terms of saying for myself who I am, yes, I'm Tof Eklund. Tof is pronounced like tofu, but if you pronounce it Tof like toffee, that's okay too. They, them pronouns, or em, that's one of the alternative or neologisms for singular pronouns, singular non-gendered pronouns. Really anything that isn't gendered. So I am non-binary transgender, and I'll explain how those things are not the same, but they can overlap. I also am self-identified as ODHD or AUDHD. That's combining autistic and ADHD traits. I thought I might be ADHD many years ago, but at the time it was called ADD, which I thought they were related to. Then it got rebranded as ADHD, and I was like, I'm not hyperactive. Okay, this is just all in my head. I'm just making, long story. Because part of my story is about coming into myself. It took me a very long time to come into understanding my own gender, no small part because I just didn't have the words for it. Words are an important part of today, as are the limits of words and language. I have a little family. We are pretty much universally neurodivergent or aneurotypical. That's an umbrella term that includes things like autistic and ADHD. Some of us are diagnosed, some are not. And in terms of who I am, as Maria mentioned, my last name is Eklund. That's Swedish. It means oak grove. I was born and grew up in San Diego in Southern California. So I'm an American, to my everlasting shame. But my heritage is that, along with a number of other things, I've got Scandinavian inheritance on both sides of the family. Somehow, the Eklunds and the Fisks independently came mostly from Norway and Sweden and other places to the American Midwest. I had relatives living in Minneapolis in my great-grandparents' and grandparents' generations. Very proud of the people of Minneapolis. Before they all decided that rather than seeking a climate similar to the one they'd come from, they independently were like, you know what? Let's go where there are beaches and lots of sunshine. This has always struck me as just a little bit amusing because I get too much sunlight really easily. Not only do I burn easily, but my eyes are like really light sensitive. That's a little bit of that old Viking blood, I guess. I've got a fascinating family history I'm not going to go into. Suffice it to say that in addition to those Vikings, it also involves land fraud. The name Eklund was not the Eklund family name until after great-granddad Eklund came to the United States and changed it from Nielsen. He then got in trouble again, but that's a whole nother story. Suffice to say that my great-grandmother Eklund showed up in San Diego. Without him, he was in jail, and with the baby granddad Paul Eklund, enough money to buy property. But I need to be moving on. I've already used like 4 minutes. So, yes, I'm non-binary. What is non-binary? Again, actually, Maria, you did a really good job because non-binary is both a gender identity and an umbrella term. It's a bit like the word queer in that way. I identify as queer as well as non-binary. I identify as genderqueer. In fact, genderqueer was the first word I ever heard that made sense of me and sense to me in terms of what my gender was. Genderqueer isn't used very often, but it's still out there, and there actually is a genderqueer flag. It's kind of nice. It's got an interesting shade of green on it, as well as a shade of purple. It's different from the one on the non-binary flag. I also sometimes, warning for the swear, describe myself as genderphobe because I choose to be assertively gender nonconforming. That's a choice. That's part of my gender presentation and performance. I'm going to talk about those things a little bit more here in a moment. So, non-binary is my gender, but there are people who come under the umbrella of non-binary who are not non-binary as their gender. For example, most people who describe themselves as agender, as not having a gender, would not say, or you can call me non-binary. It's a bit like this. I said I'm queer. Queer is an umbrella term that includes gay. But there are absolutely gay men who do not want to be referred to as queer. It's like that. Also, this is important, while non-binary is an umbrella, you have to be careful applying any of these Western, and in this case English language terms to indigenous genders. Indigenous cultures in many cases have 3 or more genders, but terms like trans man and trans woman do not describe people who are, for example, Pa'afafine or Muhe. And even in cultures that have what could be called a non-binary gender, like the Bisu, who in addition to Kalabai and Kalalai, which are loosely trans-masculine and trans-feminine genders, also, sorry, I said Bisu. I meant the bougie people. Bisu is the intermediary or non-binary gender, but you would not call someone who's Bisu non-binary. That is just a way of talking about it from an outside perspective. It's not how these cultures understand things from the inside. So, non-binary and transgender. This is a Venn diagram. I'm non-binary transgender. I'm both. But most people who are transgender are not non-binary. They are binary transgender, meaning trans men or trans women. And not everyone who's non-binary identifies as transgender, but you're not likely to bother someone who's non-binary if you say, oh, you're trans. This relates to some of the places where things get messy in terms of ways that queer communities get divided and turned against each other. There are people in the queer community who insist that to be really trans, you have to have medically transitioned. That's called transmedicalism. I'm wholly not on board. But some non-binary people who have not medically transitioned in any way do not use the word transgender for themselves because they don't feel that's appropriate or that that could cause confusion with other people. For example, while I tell you things that no one has a right to demand of anyone, I've not had any gender-affirming surgeries, but I am on hormone therapy. And hormone therapy makes me trans-feminine, as does my gender presentation. I'm non-binary, but I'm trans-feminine. How can that be? Because I've shifted my gender presentation and engaged in medical gender affirmation to make myself closer to what people think of as feminine. I'm trans-feminine as a direction, but I am absolutely not a woman. This stuff can be difficult. It's okay to get things wrong. Very briefly, in terms of what transgender, what non-binary issues are, it all depends on how we're perceived. Because non-binary people are generally illegible to most of society. They do not see us. I don't get seen as non-binary. People impose a binary gender, and depending on how a non-binary person is presenting, they may absolutely come across as having a binary gender if you're just looking at their clothes, their presence or absence of facial hair and makeup. This means that a lot of the time, non-binary people are just assumed to be men or women, not even trans men or women, and assumed in many cases to be doing it wrong because the way they're performing, being male or female, isn't what other people want or expect. I have this whole thing that I'm going to gloss over real quickly on my beard because it's a way of illustrating things. Before I grew out my beard, including when I was in Orlando, Florida, before moving to Auckland, and after I moved, I was subject to street harassment. Not because I passed for female, but because people read me as a non-passing trans woman. And people who are early in transition or who can't afford all the features of medical transition are often very vulnerable. On a couple occasions in Orlando, Florida, when I was out during the working day, now I had a full-time job, I wasn't dressed in any extreme way, I got propositioned. And in ways that make me think that they thought I was available. I was a streetwalker, I was a sex worker. Nothing against sex workers. But that's what people saw. I experienced a variety of transphobic reactions when I was early in the time I was in Auckland. In the first year I was here, before I grew out the beard. I had a woman tell me, if you want to be a woman, learn how to move like one. I had a couple of people out on the street with religious signs say at me, "It offends us, you know." I'm not quite sure what it was, but it was directed at me. I had an old man I passed say, "Crawl up." I was like, really? Wow, that's old-fashioned. I was almost charmed. And I had a couple of workmen very assertively chat me up. I was trying to be friendly at first, and I soon realized I needed to get out of the conversation, but was too polite to do so. Among other things, not having had the experience that many cisgender women who are conventionally attractive have, of being seen as desirable and having to deal with unwanted male attention. I believe these men read me as in some way analogous to one of the Pacifica Pacifica third genders like Pa'apafine, but also, and more importantly, as with the people who tried to proposition me in Orlando, saw me as vulnerable. Probably not economically vulnerable, but vulnerable in terms of my self-esteem. They cracked open a can of something in a paper bag and tried to get me to drink it. And when I finally disengaged myself, one guy offered his hand to shake. I shook it, and he found a way to stroke his thumb up the palm of my hand while whispering to me, "I have a big dick." Much worse happens to trans people, okay? I'm not making a case for how much I've suffered. But in terms of the beard, since I grew it out, I get stared at more. I get stared at all the time. I got stared at before, but it's even more so now. But I haven't been street harassed, not once. Why? Not because people see me as non-binary, but because they see me, instead of as woman enough to be, I'm going to use another swear word, fuckable, as a man in a dress. Well, oh well. Now, kids are different. Before and after, but if anything, even more so after, I will have, like when I've gone to pick up my child at the primary school, a kid will ask me, "Why are you wearing a dress or skirt?" Sometimes they've asked me, "Are you a boy or a girl?" I'm always happy to answer those questions because they come from a profoundly open, innocent place. Though I did also once have an experience at what I thought was a safe event in Orlando where I got asked a question like that, and I explained that I was non-binary, and the kid immediately goes, "He's an alien! Kill him!" But That was something. Okay, I am not good at concision. So, I'm trying to keep things moving along. I mentioned that I'm also autistic, ADHD. A lot of people who are neurodivergent are also non-conforming in terms of gender and or sexuality. This is another Venn diagram. There are plenty of people who are autistic who are not non-binary, and for that matter, who are cisgender and straight. But a lot of people who are autistic or other neurodivergent don't conform well. This is sometimes described as being because we don't properly process social norms. But my experience and that of many other people I've spoken to who are part of both the gender non-conforming and autistic community is it's like looking at gender from the outside. Why are you people doing that? What is such a big deal? Does it matter if I wear a dress? Clearly it does, but why? Also, even autistic people who are cisgender and straight are likely to have their gender policed because by and large we tend to be not good at performing it in the way people expect. And that's what things like bathroom bans are actually about, what they actually do. There have been a number of cisgender women who have been harassed for being in the women's bathroom. Cisgender is the opposite of trans, meaning you are staying the same gender. These are people that the people who pass these laws think should be in women's restrooms, but not like that. You look like a man. Ooh. Because it's all about control. I'm not going to dive deep into anything along the lines of transgender exclusion today. It's too much. But suffice it to say that the main thing that people mean when they say some of these things is, including people who use the word gender critical. That is a word for transphobia now. It's a word people are using who are transphobic. They mean gender isn't real, but sex is real and is absolute. Okay. That isn't just binary thinking, it's dualist thinking. I had a little thing I was going to say about Judith Butler. Suffice to say about Judith Butler, that Butler is very complicated and has been presented now in popular formats, which is dangerous because she's difficult to understand, but also in reductive ways. If anyone says that Judith Butler thinks that no one should have a gender, that's a misreading that is perhaps understandable if you read some of Butler's earliest work and pay no attention to their entire career since. Judith Butler is a scholar who came out as non-binary in 2020 after decades of work on gender. In hindsight, all of Judith Butler's stuff on gender is a non-binary critique of patriarchy. But even though Butler helped a lot of people think about their own genders, Butler didn't have the words to describe what they were doing until recently. I can relate to that. Frankly, some of what I read in Judith Butler as a student probably delayed my coming out as non-binary because I was trying to go, oh, well, I just need to be the gender I am to the best I can in the way that actually suits me, as I started increasingly not coming across as cisgender at all. But briefly, because I did promise I'd talk about non-dualism and non-reductivism, and I'm already over time. Dualism is a theological and philosophical concept. It's the idea that things are divided into naturally fundamentally opposed opposites, good and evil, God and the devil, male and female, straight and gay. Most people today are not self-aware dualists in a kind of old theological sense. But gender critics, including Butler, have observed and pointed out just how much binary thinking, binaries don't have to be dualist, but how much dualism there is in binaries people have. So, for example, emotional and rational, strong and weak, breadwinner and homemaker. Those are all gendered binaries associated with man and woman or male and female And just like God and devil, they have a value hierarchy to them. Rational is associated with being male, which is kind of a laugh, honestly. And emotional is female. But not just that. In doing so, emotional is a trait that is inferior to reason. I don't think that's the case. But more importantly, if emotion is something female and emotion is inferior, then when you disagree with a woman, she's just being irrational. Why is she being irrational? Because she's emotional. And if you bully her to the point that she bursts, whether it's into a tirade at you or into tears, you've just proved that she's emotional, and emotional is not rational. That's dualist thinking. I'm generally opposed to any dominating structure of thought. So in saying I'm non-dualist, I'm not the opposite of dualist. I'm not in line with people who say everything has one common nature, or everything takes place in 3 phases. There's some academic thought that goes that way. Or there are 4 fundamental elements that everything's made up of. Or there are 5 fundamental elements. Depends whether you're using ancient Greek/Western or Chinese elemental theory. These things can be useful as models. There's nothing wrong with dividing things into pairs or noting an opposition until you start thinking or stop thinking and take it as natural and inevitable. You may be hot or cold in this room right now. The actual temperature of the room is a matter of heat energy that exists on an infinite continuum between absolute zero and an upper limit that may not exist. Your subjective experience matters, but it's not the same as saying the room is hot or cold for everyone. Is that too obvious? Maybe it is too obvious, but this applies to a lot of other things as well. So to wrap up, now that I'm well over time, if I'm non-dualist in my values and non-binary in my gender, my ethics are fundamentally non-reductive. If you tell me you're a man, of course you're a man to me, that's fine. That doesn't mean that I'm going to assume that you like to fish. It also means that I'm not automatically going to make assumptions about what's in your pants, because what the fuck? That is the most simple, brief version of being non-reductive I can come up with. A slightly more theoretical one is, as human beings, we all have so much more in common with each other than with everything else in the cosmos, even just life on Earth. But we also are all different, and all those differences matter. And while there are times when you can't acknowledge every difference, if you had to, we couldn't do the census. But those differences are still real and still there. And if I care about you as a person, all of those differences matter, including the ones that I don't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tof. And I acknowledge your further indulgence because we are over time. Please take a moment to close your eyes and breathe. Breathe in what you have heard. Breathe out what is done. My closing words are again by Bex Fraser, who said that they didn't want everybody to know that they were actually here. So I won't tell you that. And this is called An Everyday Poem by Bex Fraser. Now Bex wants a little rest, and future Bex also wants a little rest, but somebody has to do the dishes. Maria, would you mind? It's now time to extinguish our chalice, and I invite you to say the words with me if you choose. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now it's time for notices, and I will give the first notice. So we are out of time, but the Zoom participants might like to have a discussion. If you wish to have a discussion after this, we might want to do it at the same time as morning tea. I invite you to think of this question: what have you heard today, and how might you relate it to your life?